enough to end the conversation. So when Trump demanded an IQ test on live television, he clearly thought he was setting the trap. He wanted the cameras to catch him looking fearless, sharper than his critics, and ready to prove once again that his mind was operating on some higher level. But 13 seconds later, Stephen Colbert asked one question, and the trap turned around so fast the room felt it. Colbert understood the performance immediately. Trump was not really asking for a test. He was asking for applause. The words IQ test were not about measurement. They were about branding. They were meant to remind the audience of the genius label, the stable mastermind image.
Said to me, "Would you like to take a cognitive test?" I said, "Is it hard?" They said, "Yes." I said, "Well, I'm a very smart person."
No, that's other people that do that. I don't. I'm very consistent. I'm a very stable genius.
The old claim that he understands everything better than the people around him. But Colbert knew the weakness inside that kind of boast. A man secure in his intelligence does not.
What you just watched was not a comedy sketch. It was not a political debate. It was something far more revealing and far more uncomfortable. Donald Trump walked into a television moment believing he had the crowd, the confidence, and the claim that would shut down every critic in the room. He demanded an IQ test on live television. He called himself a stable genius. Again. And for a moment, the room was his. Then Stephen Colbert asked one question. Not a complicated question, not a legal argument, not a policy challenge. Just 13 words that cut through everything Trump had built. And in the silence that followed, something the former president never expected happened. The trap reversed direction. What you are about to see is not just a late-night moment. It is a masterclass in exposure. Because what Colbert understood, what Trump apparently did not, is that the most revealing test of any leader is not how they perform when the room is cheering. It is how they respond when the room goes quiet and one honest question hangs in the air. Stay with me. Because by the end of this, you are going to see why this 13-second exchange became one of the most shared clips in late-night history, and why it had nothing to do with IQ. To understand why this moment landed the way it did, you have to understand what Donald Trump has been doing for nearly a decade. Because the stable genius brand is not new. It is not casual. It is one of the most carefully maintained pieces of political theater in modern American history. Trump has been calling himself a genius. In public, on television, on social media, since at least 2018. That was the year he tweeted, unprompted, that he was a very stable genius after questions arose about his fitness for office. He did not make the claim reluctantly. He made it enthusiastically, repeatedly, and with the certainty of a man who had decided the label was simply a fact the rest of the world needed to catch up to. He also took and repeatedly bragged about something called the Montreal Cognitive Assessment, a simple screening test used to detect early signs of cognitive decline. It involves tasks like drawing a clock, naming animals, and repeating lists of words. Doctors use it to check for dementia, not to measure intelligence. But Trump treated his passing score as proof of exceptional mental capability, and he brought it up again and again, daring anyone to challenge him. The challenge, of course, eventually came, and it came from exactly where you would expect it to come from in 2024. A late-night television stage from a man who has spent years studying how political confidence can be its own form of deception. Stephen Colbert is not a journalist. He is a comedian. But Colbert has always understood something that many serious political analysts miss. That comedy creates a different kind of pressure than confrontation does. When a journalist pushes back on a claim, the politician can call it bias. When a comedian asks a question and the room laughs, the politician has nowhere to go. The laughter is the verdict. So here is the sequence. Donald Trump, during an appearance, comfortable, commanding, working the crowd, declares that he has taken cognitive tests. He implies others should too. He throws out the challenge. IQ tests. He wants to compare. He is certain, from the look on his face and the weight in his voice, that this is a winning move. And then Stephen Colbert, who had been watching this performance very carefully, paused.
Said to me, "Would you like to take a cognitive test?" I said, "Is it hard?" They said, "Yes." I said, well, I'm a very smart person.
No, that's other people that do that. I don't. I'm very consistent. I'm a very stable genius.
The old claim that he understands everything better than
But here is the problem with that strategy when you are on a stage with someone who understands it. It only works if no one challenges the premise. If someone asks quietly, simply, without hostility, okay, but what if the test doesn't go the way you expect? The declaration collapses because a declaration is armor, and Colbert just found the gap in the armor. This is the moment the room changed. Colbert did not yell, he did not argue, he did not produce a competing claim. He simply asked a question that contained inside it the entire problem with the Genius Act.
Trump's performance hanging in the air. If the test proves you are brilliant, will you accept the result even if it does not flatter you? That was the question. Not whether Trump could take a test, not whether he could brag about winning one, not whether he could insult the person giving it. The real question was whether he could accept measurement without controlling the outcome. And that is where the entire
That is why the laughter was not just laughter, it was recognition. The audience did not need Colbert to explain the joke because they had been living inside it. They understood that the IQ test challenge was never about intelligence. It was about dominance. It was about declaring once again that Trump exists in a category where normal measurement does not apply, and that anyone who disagrees is either a loser, a liar, or too stupid to understand. Colbert simply made that logic visible. And then it got even more specific. Because Trump did not just claim to be a genius in the abstract, he demonstrated in real time exactly how the self-certification system works.
wobble.
Guy calls you a genius, you're not going to disavow. Do we agree? Only a stupid person would disavow, not a genius. No genius would disavow being called a genius.
Why would I disavow? Guy calls you a genius. Is anybody going to disavow? We don't disavow.
And my Republican opponents said,
This is not just a personality quirk. In a political leader, this is a governance philosophy. It means expert advice only matters when it confirms the existing preference. It means polling only matters when the numbers go up. It means court decisions only matter when the ruling goes your way. It means the entire apparatus of democratic accountability, elections, audits, investigations, oversight, is only legitimate when it produces the verdict you wanted. That is the real conversation Colbert opened. Not about IQ scores, about the relationship between a leader and the truth. Colbert himself articulated this with precision that would make any political scientist nod.
Colbert widened the point. He reminded viewers that leadership is full of tests far more important than IQ. Can you listen to experts during a crisis? Can you admit when a promise fails? Can you focus on families paying higher bills instead of your own applause? Can you handle a joke without turning it into a...
Political psychologists and leadership scholars have long distinguished between two types of intelligence that matter in leadership. The first is cognitive processing, raw analytical horsepower. The second, and the one that predicts actual leadership outcomes, is what researchers call epistemic humility. The ability to know what you don't know. The willingness to update your beliefs when presented with new information. The capacity to be wrong without experiencing it as a catastrophic threat to identity. Studies of American presidents consistently show that the leaders rated most effective by historians were not necessarily the highest IQ figures in the room. They were the ones who could tolerate ambiguity, delegate to experts without feeling diminished, and accept correction without treating it as an attack. Lincoln is the most cited example. So is Eisenhower. Leaders who understood that their job was not to be the smartest person in the room, but to assemble the smartest room possible. What Colbert was pointing at, through comedy, through a single devastating question, is that the qualities Trump most loudly claims are the ones he most visibly lacks when the pressure is real. And the audience recognized that. They laughed because recognition and absurdity often feel like the same thing. By the time the exchange was over, the IQ test had become irrelevant. No test was going to happen. No score was going to be compared. The moment had already done its work. Not by measuring intelligence, but by measuring something harder to quantify and far more important. The clip spread across social media within hours, not because it was the funniest thing Colbert had ever done, not because it destroyed Trump in any conventional political sense, but because it gave millions of people a precise language for something they had been feeling for years without quite being able to name it. The anxiety is not that Trump might score lower on an IQ test than he claims. The anxiety, the real deeply felt politically consequential anxiety, is that we have a man in the highest office in the land who has constructed a reality in which he is always right, always winning, always smarter than whoever is challenging him, and for whom every mechanism of accountability is automatically illegitimate the moment it produces an inconvenient result. That is not a cognitive problem. It is a character problem. And character, unlike IQ, does not require a test to reveal. It reveals itself every time the room goes quiet and one honest question hangs in the air. Trump's reaction in that moment, the quick pivot, the visible discomfort, the retreat into the same familiar bravado, told the audience everything. As the narrator observed in the original broadcast, a man who loves being measured only when he gets to hold the ruler had just been asked to put down the ruler. And the whole room watched what happened next. Here is what this story is really about. And it is bigger than one late-night exchange. America is a country built on the idea that no one is above accountability. Not the wealthy, not the powerful, not the man with the loudest voice or the biggest crowd. The entire architecture of this republic, the courts, the press, the elections, the oversight, exists because the founders understood something essential. That power unchecked by accountability is not strength. It is a slow collapse. What Stephen Colbert did in 13 seconds was hold up a mirror. Not a flattering one, not a hostile one, just a clear one. And what it reflected was a man who has spent years insisting that the mirror is broken whenever it shows him something he does not want to see. For the Americans watching, the older voters, the parents, the veterans, the teachers, the small business owners trying to make sense of what is happening to their country, this moment mattered because they know from their own lives that the measure of a person is not what they claim when things are easy. It is what they do when the result is not in their favor, when the business fails, when the diagnosis comes back, when the vote doesn't go their way, when a 13-word question hangs in the air and the honest answer is harder than the comfortable one. Donald Trump may never take an IQ test. He may never need to. The test that matters has already been administered. Over and over in courtrooms and Oval Offices and press rooms and Twitter feeds. And the results are public. The question is whether enough people are watching. Here's the question I want you to think about. And I want a real answer, not a partisan one. If a leader refuses to accept any result, verdict, statistic, or judgment that doesn't go in their favor, can that leader actually govern a country of 330 million people with competing needs, competing voices, and competing truths? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one. And if you think more people need to see this, share it right now. https yas utgya by I2IKJTA8 SSI. Arbukos 1 ADCJIOIDW